while, and I know the Ravens haven't done much, but I do know that when I landed at LAX from Sydney, Australia, my WNST text went off. Of course, brought to you by Coons Florida Security Boulevard, and Dennis will be here on Thursday. And Matt Elam in trouble for selling drugs. I mean, buying, using, okay. Selling drugs? I mean, Luke, this whole Matt Elam thing is really going down a whole different path here than just we can't get him on the field and he's a first-round draft pick. This is a troubling little story here over the weekend.
Well, to me, it seals what could have been the case already, but this is the worst first-round pick the Ravens have ever made. And I know some people immediately will say, well, what about Kyle Bowler? What about Travis Taylor? Those guys at least had some moments here and there. Those guys played and started multiple years. Matt Elam was benched about midway through his second season and never got back on the field. Now, part of that was the injury last year and certainly had the knee issue this past season as far as missing the first 7 games of the season. But this is a guy who's barely contributed. And now, as he's walking out the door, and the Ravens, would there have been a possibility of re-signing him to a 1-year deal to be a special teams guy and a depth guy? I could have seen a scenario like that. Certainly wasn't going to be a priority, but this seals the deal for him, one, being out the door and certainly not being in their plans, and they issued a statement Sunday morning confirming that he's not in their plans, and kind of made it sound like that was already going to be the case. But,
yeah, that was the case, right? I mean, you and I have been around it enough, right?
They could have brought him back on a 1-year deal. They did Terrence Cody. They brought back on a 1-year deal after his rookie contract expired. I could have seen a scenario like that. Now that's clearly not going to be the case. This guy might not play in the league again. I mean, look, you get caught with marijuana. You have a little bit, and it's pretty clear that it's just yours. The stigma for that has certainly changed.
Yeah, there's a dozen states where that's sort of kind of legal, right? Including Washington, D.C., right? So,
yeah, but when you have 126, 127 grams of marijuana, that's a lot. I mean, that's a sizable amount, and it's very clear. You're either selling that, you're delivering that, whatever your involvement is in that, and then to be caught, pulled over because you're driving recklessly in the process of carrying all that, it's just not smart. It's dumb. It's very embarrassing for him. It's embarrassing for the Ravens with him not officially being out the door yet, considering his rookie contract.
Yeah, it's all semantics, right? If they had released him already, it would be former Raven. That would sound a lot better than, like, him being it's all semantics. He wasn't going to play again as far as I knew and from all the information that I had on the inside. But, a career total, dude, 1 interception, right, and 1/2 a sack. That's the 5-year total on Matt Elam, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, 4 years, that's all he did. Missed his entire third season with the torn biceps. And, I mean, this guy just wasn't very good. Putting aside what happened Sunday morning in Miami, which was embarrassing for him, there's still embarrassment attached to the organization for that because he has still been with them and doesn't officially become a free agent until March 9th. But it really speaks to, he was the first player they drafted after Super Bowl 47, and we know how their drafts have gone by and large. There have been a lot of misses, and he's at the top of that list. And I remember at the time, it was very easy to connect the dots and say, okay, well, this guy's the heir apparent to Ed Reed. And there were people at the time even saying, well, this guy didn't show that kind of coverage ability at Florida. It was more of a box safety, more of a strong safety. There was even a sentiment, Nestor, that this was a safe pick for the Ravens picking 32nd, that, maybe not the best player.
Yeah, but he was going to play in the league. He was going to fulfill his contract. He was going to get on the field, and he was going to be a player. He was going to be one thing you wouldn't have to worry about. Maybe not a star, but one thing you wouldn't have to worry about.
Yeah, and I mean, as much as we talk about the draft, and we've talked about the lack of playmakers that the Ravens have found, finding special guys, that's not easy. Sometimes I think people forget that the Ravens drafted 3 Hall of Fame players in their first 7 years, and that's not to excuse what they've done since then, but it's just to show that They got really lucky that Ray Lewis fell to them late in the first round. They got really lucky that Ed Reed was still there when they picked late in the first round.
Not to mention Todd Heap and a whole number of other guys that were really good football players.
Right. So, but to get back to your point, people view guys like Courtney Upshaw and Michael Orr because they didn't make it to the Pro Bowl that these guys weren't very good players. That's not the case.
Or even Ben Grubbs was another guy who was a really good football player.
Those guys are 4-year starters. Those guys played. Matt Elam wasn't that. Matt Elam wasn't close to that. That's why I'll challenge anyone. I'll hear Sergio Kindle, even though he was a second-round pick. He was their top pick in 2010. Very strange circumstances with him.
I don't think we'll ever know the truth of that.
Yeah, right. There were some, but in fairness to people being critical of the Ravens, there were red flags about him before he fell down 2 flights of stairs and fractured his skull. And
Matt Elam was a guy that all 32 teams would have looked at and said, "I would take that guy. If that guy's still there in the second or third round, I'd want him on my team." He looked to be a guy that was a pretty clean pick. I mean, no one said, "Well, that's a reach," or "He won't play," or "He'll be a bust." Everyone, I think, universally thought he would be an NFL football player, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, and when you're taken at the end of the first round, I mean, were there teams out there that had second round grades on him? I'm sure there were. There's no doubt about that, and there were probably some teams that said, well, this guy really doesn't have coverage ability. Maybe some teams went through the pre-draft process and thought, well, maybe not impressed with his character, or maybe he doesn't come across as the smartest guy, and Sunday probably a pretty good indication of that, quite frankly. But you're right in the sense of it's not like this guy wasn't being talked about, and then the Ravens drafted him, out of nowhere. This wasn't a Division II kind of player or anything like that. Which the Ravens have been successful drafting guys like Brandon Williams and Ladarius Webb.
Yeah, he had the kind of tape and the kind of numbers down in Florida that looked like a first-round guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, he had the big hits. He had some big plays. I mean, like I said, at the time there were questions about his coverage ability and whether he was going to be more of a free safety or more of a box safety. It's clear that he profiled better as a box safety, but the problem with that was he couldn't tackle. I mean, as much as people talked about the coverage ability, and rightfully so, how many tackles did this guy miss over the last few years? I mean, he was a liability out there. That's why I don't want to hear that Kyle Bowler was a worse draft pick than him, because I don't think Kyle Bowler was a worse draft pick. That doesn't mean Kyle Bowler was a good draft pick, but he actually played. He started multiple years. He had his moments here and there. There weren't many, but there were some. Same with Travis Taylor. Same with Mark Clayton. You look at Matt Elam, what do you point to? Okay.
Well, I gave you one interception and one half a sack.
He had that
the stats,
decent
right?
performance against Detroit in that Monday night game that Justin Tucker hit 6 field goals. But if you remember, that performance came on the heels of him taking some shots at Calvin Johnson, of all people. Maybe speaking to not being the smartest guy that's ever worn the purple. Just wasn't very good. Other than that, this is a guy who, this past season couldn't even get on the field as a defensive player. The few times he didn't really look very good, and certainly people will point to what happened in that New England game, even if it was Eric Weddle's fault. Matt Elam, still his assignment there wasn't to fall down on the ground on the Hogan touchdown. So this is a guy who didn't even make it on the field enough to really judge how big of a bust he was. Year one, he was a rookie. It's fine. Rookies aren't always going to come in and light the world on fire, but he got benched year two, and as much as you like the fact that the Ravens have Eric Weddle now, Matt Elam's a big reason that, why they went down this road of going through free agents and other draft picks like Terrence Brooks, and they couldn't get that position right, and finally they did with bringing in Eric Weddle. But look how many resources were exhausted in the process there, and that started with Matt Elam being a total bust. So, I think Sunday was just the culmination of what had already been pretty much determined, and whether he was the worst first-round pick they've ever had or not, I think this certainly broke the tie, because last time I checked, guys like Kyle Bowler and Travis Taylor at least didn't embarrass the organization in the way that Matt Elam did on Sunday.
Now, that being said, the Combine's in Indy this week.
Sure.
I know there's not been a lot of activity on the Ravens side other than an arrest, which, would be the one thing in the offseason that no one needs. Ozzy's not going to be facing the fire this week and talking to the media. It'll be John. We're going into a really, really, strange period here over the next 6 weeks because free agency's coming, cap issues are coming, a bad season, another season where, I would say bad season, but another season where good things did not happen for them. Here's where the flame gets turned up a little bit. We haven't talked a lot about the Ravens over the last month since the Super Bowl win by the Patriots, the miraculous win, which I've already have amnesia about, Luke. I've forgotten that even happened at this point. I'm sure I'll be reminded in Indianapolis this week.
Right.
This is a big time for the Ravens, and this is sort of the ghost of draft past, and Matt Elam in handcuffs over the weekend as they head to Indianapolis should be a nice little warning for everybody, from Ozzy to Eric and Joe Ortiz all the way through as to what's at stake here over the next 6 weeks.
Well, I think even before the next 6 weeks, I think you look over the next 10 days or so.
Sure.
What's going to happen from a salary cap standpoint? I mean, this team needs to clear some space. This team has some dead weight, some obvious choices. Sharice Wright, I think it's very clear what his fate was when the owner calls you out during the end-of-year press conference. I think you could throw guys like Kendrick Lewis and Kyle Arrington into that discussion. But then you go beyond those obvious calls, and then you have Elvis Dumervil, and you have Ladarius Webb, and you have Dennis Pitta. And you go down that list, and Jeremy Zuda, and you kind of ask the question, are these guys going to be as good as or better than they were in 2016? And then at what cost? I think Ladarius Webb had a nice second half of the season, his first year as a safety. But at the same time, I look at his cap figure, and that's pretty prohibitive. That's not a cap figure indicative of what he's going to give you on the field. I think Dennis Pitta falls into that category. I mean, I get it. He caught 86 passes, but he's a guy who wasn't getting any yards after the catch, and he was able to bear the fruits of what was a failed passing game that couldn't throw to the chains. And how many times did Joe Flacco checking down? And it's not any one person's fault necessarily, but it was a broken offense. And Pitta being what his cap figure is going to be.
Well, then you have the free agents too on top of that, right? Then you have Wagner, and you've got Brandon Williams. You got all that going on.
Yeah, but before they get to that, they got to figure out how much cap space they're going to clear here. And I think, and if you remember, Nestor, we talked about this at last year's Combine when the Ravens were 5-11, and everyone was talking about the injuries. And I was someone that was talking about this not being a roster that was good enough before the injuries set in. And we talked about how many changes should they make at that point. Is it just tinker and add a couple guys? Basically what they did last year. Didn't make a whole lot of cap-saving moves. Chris Canty, Darryl Smith were really the only two that they did last year. And then they added Eric Weddle and Ben Watson and Mike Wallace. And beyond that, they kind of went with the same team that they had. They cut Eugene Monroe, but that was only after they knew they had Ronnie Stanley coming in. And you know what? That team was better than it was the year before, but it still wasn't good enough. And it was still counting on a lot of older veteran players. And I think that's what's so fascinating is how much change is this team going to make with the thought in mind, because of what you just said, if you make too much change and you're going with more youth, what do you run the risk of? Well, maybe you don't make the playoffs again if some of that youth isn't ready to go. But at the same time, is it really worth it to maybe try to improve just a little bit and try to keep the band together and try to hope that some of these older guys that I mentioned can hold on and they squeak out another win and maybe make the playoffs at 9-7, but they're still counting on a lot of older players? Is that really what's best for this team in terms of trying to build its next championship roster? I don't know. I think that's where Steve Bisciotti and probably what was said behind closed doors down in Florida after the end-of-year press conference, to me, that's really where this all lies. If he's confident in Ozzie Newsome and John Harbaugh, and he clearly still is, or he wouldn't have, or he would have fired them in early January. I'm interested to know, did Steve Bisciotti say, look, we need to make the playoffs next year or else, or was it a case of, look, we all know things top to bottom need to be better around here, and we need to get younger, quite frankly. We have a lot of older players on this roster. Let's get younger. Let's clean up our cap a little bit moving forward. And if that means we go 7-9 in 2017, but we have young players stepping forward and we're looking like we're trending upward, then fine. I can live with that. Block out all the noise. If he gave that kind of message, then I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of changes with some of these older players being cut and maybe going with a little more youth at certain spots. You know, they could do that at the tight end position very easily, even though there are plenty of question marks there with some of those younger options. So I'm just philosophically, Nestor, I'm not sure we're going to get a specific answer. You know, John Harbaugh is not going to get up there and say we're rebuilding.
Right,
Ozzie Newsome's not going to say we're rebuilding.
And Joe Flacco probably doesn't want to hear that either, right?
Right, but at the same time, if you're stuck in between and you're not on the verge of being a championship team, and I think it'd be a really tough sell to say that the Baltimore Ravens are on the verge of being a championship team right now when you look at the roster. And on the flip side, if you're not doing things with the thought in mind that you're trying to build your next championship team, you know, I kind of question what you're doing then. You know, you're just spending to the cap on a lot of veteran guys. So I'm really fascinated from a philosophical standpoint, and just, you know, the proof will be in their actions. If they make 6 or 7 or 8 salary cap cuts here, that's going to be the most they've done something like that since post 2001. But you know, the thing.
But nobody's heart's going to break on any of these guys because I don't think anybody looks at them and says. I mean, I think a lot of people look and say we got to keep Brandon Williams around here, right? Like we got to keep the good players we have, not the Jeremy Zutas and not the Elvis Dumervilles at the end of the rope and the Ladarius Webb in a strange position. I mean, and for these guys, if they hit the market, any of these guys, what's Elvis Dumerville worth on the market? What's Jeremy Zuta worth on the market? What would the New York Giants give Dennis Pitta? That's really the big question, and that's the question Ozzie has to answer every year, right?
Yeah, and that's what's going to be interesting because I think we've seen very clearly, without breaking down the minutia of it, this isn't considered to be a great free agent class. And the cap's going up another $10+ million. So there's going to be money out there. Guys are going to get paid, and that's where it gets really tricky in trying to keep Brandon Williams and trying to keep Rick Wagner and trying to keep Kyle Juszczyk and trying to keep Lawrence Guy. Guys that you would say, yeah, I'd like to have them back. They still have plenty of good football ahead of them, but they hit the market, and you just said it. All it takes is one team, and in the case of someone like Brandon Williams, and I think the guy that's probably going to end up being the biggest surprise in terms of what the money is going to be, you get the sense that Rick Wagner is going to have a big market because there isn't a ton of quality that's going to be hitting the open market at the right tackle position. And I think teams look at him as a guy that says, look, he might not be a Pro Bowl player, but he's an above-average right tackle.
Yeah, he's an NFL right. We could put him in there, plug and play, right?
Yeah, and under normal circumstances where you had a better free agent market, he might be a $5 million, $6 million a year player, but this year, the way it's sounding, this guy could be getting maybe not Kelechi Osemele money, but somewhere not far off from that. Right tackles don't get left tackle money, but he could be in the neighborhood where he's approaching $8, $9, maybe $10 million a year if teams are that desperate.
Yeah, the Ravens aren't going to give him that kind of money.
Well, and I'm not saying they should either, but it just goes to my point of even these guys they want to keep, even if you have the cap space for it, they hit the open market. It really gets to be unsettling.
Well, because so many teams have sandbagged too. I mean, remember last year, Jacksonville, Oakland having $30, $40, $50 million to spend. That's how assembly happens, right? I mean, the Browns have a ton of money, right? I mean, now whether you want to sign with them or not, but that's part of the story with the Combine this week and with free agency as well, is who are you competing with and how much money do they have? Because the Ravens have historically always spent to the cap. The Ravens have never had money, right?
Yeah, and that's where I asked the question then about some of these veteran guys. What are you holding on for? Is the thought that you want to try to get to be a little bit better with and hope these older guys still play at a high enough level, even though they're going to be expensive, or do you cut some of the fat, so to speak, and say, you know what? We might be increasing our likelihood of maybe going 7-9 and missing the playoffs again, and who knows what that means. I mean, like I said, Steve Bisciotti would be the one to have that conversation with Ozzie Newsome and Harbaugh. But if that means you're getting your cap in better position, if that means you're going to definitively find out about some of these younger guys that have been around for the last 2 to 3 years, guys like a Carl Davis, for example, I'm just throwing that out there as one name, then you are in better position from a cap standpoint after that. And if you have another good draft like 2016 looks like it's on its way to being a really good draft, and that's without knowing what happens with Correa or Kaufusi, then I think the Ravens are in much better position. This whole playoffs or else thing really concerns me as far as the long-term viability of this roster, because I don't look at this roster right now with Steve Smith being gone and Terrell Suggs being another year older, and just go down the list. Elvis Dumerville probably not going to be back, and some of the other names I mentioned, and maybe Brandon Williams gets overwhelmed by someone and he leaves. This roster is not equipped then to say that they're suddenly just going to be better out of thin air, unless they find a special playmaker in the draft, a guy that comes in and is a Pro Bowl player from day one. If they do that, then all bets are off. But I just look at this roster right now, and I see a team that should be trying to get younger and not a complete rebuild, because you do have a franchise quarterback, and you do have a franchise left tackle, it looks like, and you do have a Pro Bowl inside linebacker, and you do have Eric Weddle, who I think still has at least another season or two of playing at a high level. So it's not as though the cupboard's completely bare, but at the same time, I'm not sure there's enough there to be saying this team needs to be held together and we just need to try to just get a little bit better. I'm not sure that's the way to go. I would be more inclined to say I'd make more changes than fewer changes. And
well, you've written a lot about this at NST.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading some of the stuff when I was away because you were starting to assess part of these issues for the team. And, this is the week where it all really starts to get talked about by all the pundits out at the Combine in Indianapolis. Everybody will be out there talking about all the team's needs and issues. Boy, the Ravens are a top 10 of sticky issues in the league, I think, because if this thing goes the wrong way, we're talking about sort of nuclear next year. We're talking about a new program around here if somehow they go 5-11 this year.
Yeah, and again, it all comes down to what it looks like. I mean, that's why I'd be fascinated to know what Steve Bisciotti said behind closed doors, whether he told these guys, we need to make the playoffs or I'm making changes next year. Or did he say, block out all that noise? You're going to hear it from everyone. You're going to hear it from the media. You're going to hear guys like us talking about it. And you're going to hear it from fans, certainly, because they have missed the playoffs 3 out of 4 years. But at the same time, we need to do what's best for the organization. And we're not just trying to sneak in the playoffs at 9-7. We're trying to build our next championship roster. And if that means making 7 or 8 or 9 cap-related moves, and if that means that maybe they trim a little bit of cap space, and that doesn't mean they can't go out and sign some guys. But at the same time, they're not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize their future. They're not going to do anything that doesn't set them up to really be really good in 2018 and 2019 when you still have Joe Flacco in his early 30s. So it's tough for me because I'm not saying to tank. I'm not saying that they should build a roster that goes 3-13 whatsoever, but got a lot of young guys on this roster that they don't know anything about. And they have a lot of old guys on this roster that still might be able to play at a decent level, but they're expensive. And that's a dangerous combination there when you have guys on the wrong side of 30 and they're making a lot of money. And just my overall message, and this goes for the cap guys, this goes for the free agents, and I wrote this at WNST.net last week. You can't afford to be too in love with your ingredients when the recipe hasn't added up the last 3 to 4 years. I mean, it's just the truth. You can't be afraid to make change. The unknown is uncomfortable. The known, you know what you're getting, but
the known wasn't good enough, right?
Added up to not be good enough. So I'm more in the camp of don't be afraid to be bold. Don't be afraid to say goodbye to some of those veteran players who might still have another year of football left. But we always say it's better to get rid of a guy a year too soon than to hold on too long. And I think the Ravens have been guilty at times over the last few years of maybe some of those guys they have held on to a little bit too long, and it adds up to having an older nucleus, and you combine that with some of the misses they've had in the draft, and it leads to a mediocre roster that's not terrible but not good enough either, and being in between is the worst place you can be.
He is Luke Jones. You can find him at Baltimore Luke on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. The Combine in Indianapolis going on all week long. We're going to have 32 teams, at least 30 or 31. I'll throw Atlanta in there as well. A lot of the same problems the Ravens. They didn't win the Super Bowl this year. We'll be monitoring all of that. And, of course, out on Facebook, we're broadcasting live on our YouTube channel as well as Facebook Live. You can check all of that out. You can always email me, nasty at WNST.net. I'm out on LinkedIn. I'm on Snapchat. I'm on Instagram. Anywhere the internet is served, including the Bio Toyota Audio Vault. We're there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Anything you miss here this week, you can go there and check it out, as well as our WNST morning newspaper. That's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. That comes to you each and every morning at 7 a.m. with all the headlines, including Luke's blogs, our videos, our audio, and all of the news, box score, standings, statistics, all the stuff you want. It's a WNST morning newspaper. It's brought to you and powered up by PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in shape there. Our text service is the way I found out about the Matt Elam transgressions over the weekend. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford at Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday. Sign up for that, and you'll always be in the know. You'll get the news first, never spam. It's how we do things around here. Good to be back from Australia. Appreciate all the love for us while we were gone. Hopefully you enjoyed some of our best of programming, but we're back for good now. Live, real, Maryland, Caps, Terps, Ravens, Wizards. Oh, and by the way, the Orioles are playing some spring training baseball as well, even though most of those games are not on Masson. I'm going to come back and continue on here. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.